Bro, most people don't know the secrets of what this Kundalini thing actually is from a science and a spiritual perspective. You don't know what I know, son? I'm not your son. What if I told you that there's a scientific explanation for how it works that was so interesting that certain three-letter agencies secretly studied it, and now we have the released documents to prove it? What document are you talking about? Well, everyone knows about the gateway process stuff. And in that document, they mention a guy named Itzhak Bentov and how a lot of the document is based on his work. And his work explains the Kundalini process. So I went beyond the document that everyone's looked at, and I dug deep to understand the science of the Kundalini and what these agencies were so deeply interested in. Let me tell you, it's wild. Well, tell me then. Well, first, you need to understand why it's so misunderstood. It's because when you activate it, it's kind of like having, stick with me, the power to use the Force. Okay, buddy, now you're memeing me. Listen, relax, Barb. What I mean is that you can use the power for good, or it can overrun you and turn you evil. And it's no wonder all the Christians scream, demons! Because think about it. If you were a Christian and you saw a Jedi doing Jedi shit, you'd automatically call it evil because that's what you're programmed to believe. But it can still be dangerous if you aren't ready, which is why you need to reach a certain level of consciousness before you activate it, or you might cause major psychological and physical issues. But we'll get into that and its mechanisms a little bit later on. First, we need to go big picture. What's the purpose of this whole Kundalini shit? Well, according to our boy Bentov, the Kundalini activated is the next step in the evolution of human consciousness, specifically the next step for the human nervous system. Think of the body as a vehicle that is constantly evolving. Bentov has a model of the Kundalini process he calls the Physio Kundalini Syndrome. This model has been scientifically studied, by the way, and corroborated in books like Kundalini, Psychosis, or Transcendence, where they studied many individuals that had so-called Kundalini Awakenings and found that Bentov's model seems to be accurate through a lot of analysis of their own case studies of a lot of different people. But there's levels to this shit. Let's go one step deeper. Now, Bentov's model actually works off another guy's model of the nervous system. That's Hans Sell, which in his book, The Stress of Life, he explains that when a body is filled with stresses, the nervous system is so busy handling them that its potential for attaining higher states of consciousness is super limited. Basically, there's too much jitteriness, or in kind of technical terms, too much noise in the system, which prevents the nervous system from rising to another level or evolving. And all schools of meditation emphasize the importance of calming down the body. But of course, the stresses in the system are actually energy patterns, and they have to be converted and eliminated and alchemized, whatever you want to call it, from the body. So let me get this straight. You're telling me that if there's too many frequencies making too much noise inside of our nervous system, we feel stressed and it keeps us from evolving our nervous system through the Kundalini? So is that why we're bombarded by frequencies all the time? Maybe. But I think the important part is that the Kundalini process is actually meant to be what Bentov calls the ultimate stress relieving mechanism. But if the process is done wrong or prematurely, then it can cause what institutions might call psychosis. How can you do it prematurely? Well, there's those main ways. Number one, you can have it happen on accident when you're not spiritually, mentally, or psychologically prepared. What could happen, as the three-letter agencies documented, by the way, is that when people are exposed to frequencies within 4 to 7 hertz range, those frequencies can activate the Kundalini. And an example that the agencies documented were your car could vibrate at those frequencies, your air conditioner, etc. The reason why it's premature leads into number 2. We can call a premature Kundalini awakening one where you haven't cleared enough noise or jitteriness or energy patterns, whatever you want to call it, out of the system yet, so the Kundalini energy tries to rise to clear the blockages. But with too many blocks, usually it's too much, which causes psychosis because people start to freak out because it's kind of like fire. In comparison, if someone has been meditating for years, clearing out all the noise, when that rises, it's a much smoother process because there's not as much fire needed. There's not as much heat created or energy needed to remove the blocks. What do you mean exactly when you're saying that the Kundalini is activated or rising? Okay, so let's go back a little bit. The Kundalini, as described in yoga literature, is said to be an energy coiled up like a serpent at the base of your spine. And when this energy is awakened, it enters the spine, rises up along it, and is seen or perceived as this luminous serpent by the person having the experience. Once it has risen all the way up through the head, the luminous rod hopefully pierces the top of the head. That is, the rod-like energy beam is seen as projecting through the skull, pointing upward. When this happens, the person is said to be illuminated. Eventually, such a person may become highly intuitive and develop psychic powers such as clairvoyance, clairaudience, or healing abilities. Whether he develops these or not depends on many factors. So again, the important part is that if the process begins to happen in someone who has too much noise or stress type energy patterns, basically blocks, the Kundalini will actually try to burn its way through the blockages. And if you have a lot of blockages and you have no spiritual advancement or maturity to know how to handle those blockages, it can be quite detrimental. In the Psychosis or Transcendence book, this is a well-documented phenomenon with the burning sensation and basically the fire burning its way through the blocks within the body and the nervous system. This is why it's not wise to just try to raise your Kundalini for fun or if you want spiritual powers. Now, what's the science part of the Kundalini Awakening? Well, there's two different parts to explain here. That being the pineal gland part, which in itself is a complex conversation. So let's focus on the whole process and we'll chat about the pineal gland mechanisms another time. So as to start, you draw your energy up the spine with effort, or you can allow the process to happen on its own or spontaneously like we talked about. Either way, here's Bentov's explanation, as the three-letter agencies documented, and in his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum. Either way, the energy is drawn up the spinal cord, which seems to create acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which then are conducted to gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. These standing waves are triggered by the heart's rhythm when it changes, and they cause vibrations in the walls of the ventricles. And the ventricles are fluid-filled cavities in the brain. These vibrations will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus, starting from the toes of the homunculus and up, which is different than what it normally does. The state of bliss described by those who have the Kundalini type experiences might just be the Kundalini completing the loop with both hemispheres of the brain, which stimulates the pleasure centers in the brain, which again, to try to keep it simple, is caused by the circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. And only when the unfolding Kundalini reaches areas of stress in the body do the symptoms become troublesome. The symptoms will persist until the stresses in that particular area of the body are released, and then this will usually appear as localized pain. That's because remember the burning sensation type feeling. When that happens, the Kundalini moves on until it reaches the next spot of stress, and then it clears that. And the severity of the symptoms is always proportional to the degree of stress that the Kundalini energy encounters on its way up the spine. When the Kundalini has run its course, the body is basically free of deep-seated stresses. And since the body is reflected in the cortex, we may say that the brain is also relieved of stresses. And this is why Bentov calls the Kundalini a great stress-relieving mechanism, because it will not allow further accumulation of stress to build up in the body once the nervous system has evolved through the Kundalini. Once a full circuit is operating smoothly, remember, because it goes all the way up, all the way back down through the abdomen, stresses will be eliminated from the system as rapidly as they build up, so that literally no permanent stress accumulation in the body is possible. So that's the evolved nervous system, huh? No stress accumulation possible. Now that actually kind of sounds nice. You know what's funny is I've heard this guy named Uncle Joe Dispenza talk about this, and with what you're saying, it makes sense that in Uncle Joe's stuff, he has meditations called Blessing of the Energy Centers, where you clear the energy or the blocks in the energy centers before you attempt to awaken the Kundalini and suck it up like a straw. It's almost like, hear me out, he knew about this information and he knew that you needed to clear the blockages first, or else the Kundalini process would suck. Yeah, he probably did. And with Uncle Joe's model, the pineal gland gets activated. And that leads directly back to Bentov's model, because Bentov says in his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum again, all that was described above, which we just talked about, may happen to people spontaneously. That is, to people who do not meditate. However, it's usually associated with much more trauma and results very frequently in the hospitalization of such people. who don't meditate, essentially. The usual diagnosis will be schizophrenia. The reason for this is that they have been catapulted suddenly into a situation in which they are functioning in more than one reality. They can see and hear things occurring in our neighboring realities. That is the astral or other higher realities, because their frequency response has been broadened. And the frequency response thing, by the way, real quick, was also part of what the three-letter agency studied. However, since they didn't have a gradual systemic evolution that meditation affords, they cannot handle the situation. The onslaught of information may be overwhelming, and they begin to mix and confuse 2 or 3 realities. And this implies that if you're going to perceive multiple realities, that there has to be a way for you to perceive it. Hence, the pineal gland is also called the third eye. All right, that'll do her for today's video. Look, I wanted to split this up into multiple parts, so this was intentionally not about the spiritual traditions of the East, which I highly respect. It wasn't included because I wanted to do that for a whole separate video. And just a quick reminder that in those Eastern traditions and in these ancient philosophies, they always recommend the help of a guru, that you don't do this on your own. And I just want to say that I highly recommend that you do not try this practice on your own. I just want this to be in this video so you know I am not condoning you trying to bring that Kundalini up in your bedroom, okay? So be careful with these techniques and study under those that have been properly trained. But we're dedicating a specific video just to the Kundalini and the spiritual traditions, and then what we're probably gonna do next is a video on the third eye, because we just ended on it. We gotta go deeper into it. So if you wanna stick around for the third eye video and many other videos like this, hit the subscribe button, because we're gonna be putting out a lot more content related to these subjects. And I just wanted to say shout out to all the people that are supporting me on Patreon, all of my family that's in the Discord community. We've got a book club that we're doing every month related to topics such like this. The book that we're in the book club going through in the Patreon right now is The Holographic Universe. So if you want to read that, study it with us, come to the conclusions and really take that in, highly recommend you join the Patreon. We've also got 2 workshops, live workshops a month, by the way. And we've also got one more thing, a live Q&A where you can ask me any questions you'd like. All right, and that all happens monthly, by the way. So check out the Patreon. Other than that, I will see you in the next video. And until then, peace.